I used to work as a housekeeper in an upscale motel in Washington, D.C. during the 1990s. My name is Sybil, and I came to the United States as a refugee from Vietnam. Even though my English was limited, I was known as one of the most dedicated workers there. People appreciated me because I was gentle and respectful, and I took real pride in everything I cleaned. The motel employees trusted me completely, and many guests would leave small notes, thanking me for how carefully I looked after their rooms. I worked long hours and rarely voiced any complaints, grateful that my life was safer than what I had escaped from. One afternoon, a strange guest arrived at the motel. He introduced himself as Mr. M, and he booked the most luxurious suite on the top floor. The place was enormous, with a full view of the city, and only wealthy clients ever stayed there. I was assigned to take care of the suite, but I soon learned that Mr. M never wanted anyone entering his room. Whenever I knocked, he would quietly say that cleaning was not needed. He appeared pleasant, always greeting the staff with a smile, but something about him made me uneasy. He remained at the motel for more than a month, and in all that time, no one but Mr. M stepped inside that suite. The Do Not Disturb sign stayed on the door like a silent warning, and I never questioned him. Then one morning, Mr. M was simply gone. The sign had been taken down, and there was no trace of him anywhere. We assumed he had left early, slipping out without asking for assistance. But when the front desk checked the system, nothing was recorded. No one remembered seeing him depart, and his name did not appear on the checkout list. It was as if he had disappeared completely, leaving no evidence that he had ever been there. The motel manager was confused, but since Mr. M had paid in advance with a credit card, no one raised any concerns. I was instructed to clean the suite. I paused at the door, feeling a warning deep inside telling me not to go in. But I was responsible for that room, and I needed to do my job. The moment I stepped inside, a horrible odor hit me. It was thick and putrid, like something had decayed. I gagged and covered my face, my eyes stinging as I looked around. The room was a disaster. What had once been a beautiful suite now looked completely ruined, as though a chaotic gathering had taken place. Furniture lay overturned. Empty bottles were scattered across the carpet, and the bed was a wreck. The sheets were twisted and marked, but the worst part was the stench. It seemed to drift from the closet, where the door was slightly open. A cold shiver swept through me as I walked toward it, each step filled with rising fear. The closet was dim, and the awful odor became even stronger as I pulled the door wide. Inside, scattered between the clothes and shoes, sat a plain cardboard box. It did not belong there, resting in the corner as if someone had placed it in a hurry. My hands shook as I reached toward it, already aware that whatever waited inside was something I would never forget. The box felt light, yet the stench coming from it was unbearable. I lifted the lid, and the moment I saw what was inside, I screamed and dropped it, stumbling backward in horror. Inside the box was a thick clump of hair, tangled and filthy, with strands stiffened by dried blood. The sight made the room spin around me. My thoughts scattered, and all I could focus on was getting away, escaping that place before I collapsed. My heart hammered as I rushed to the door, my legs trembling like they might fail beneath me. I managed to reach the elevator, though my hands were shaking so much that I could barely hit the button. As the doors slid shut, I leaned against the wall, trying to breathe through the panic. But the smell seemed to stay with me, and the image of the bloody hair was burned deep into my thoughts. I could not push it away. It overwhelmed me entirely. I lost consciousness before the elevator reached the lobby. When I opened my eyes again, I was surrounded by motel workers, medical responders, and officers. The motel had turned into a crime scene, with investigators moving through the suite, taking photographs and collecting items. The police asked me questions, but I could barely speak through the shock. They explained that Mr. M had used a false name and a stolen card when he checked in. The victim was revealed to be a brave movie worker who had disappeared weeks earlier. The hair in the box belonged to her, a horrible clue in a much darker case. I never went back to that motel. I left my job that day, unable to walk into that building again. The entire ordeal carved a deep wound in me, one that never fully healed. I never forgot the fear of that moment, the smell, the sight of that terrible box. It followed me into my sleep, and even as the years passed, I could not shake the sense that I had just barely avoided something far worse than I could imagine. Before we move to the next story, if this is your first visit, please remember to subscribe to our channel and tap the bell icon to stay updated with new terrifying tales. We appreciate your support. Please share these stories with your friends and family. Thank you. The storm had raged non-stop for hours. Rain hammered the windshield as I moved along the empty highway, my fingers tightening around the steering wheel. The wipers moved back and forth at full speed, yet the road ahead remained difficult to see through the sheets of water. I was on a trip by myself, just trying to escape my usual routine for a while. But the terrible weather and a crash further down the highway had slowed me far more than I planned. Now it was long past midnight, and I was worn out. When a flickering neon sign finally appeared in the distance, I let out a breath of relief. The sign read Sunset Motel, although the S was burned out, making it look like Unset Motel. At that point, I did not care. I needed somewhere to stop. I turned into the gravel lot, the tires crunching loudly as the car came to a halt. The motel was a one-level building shaped like an L, with a line of rooms, each door chipped and faded from age. The rain made everything seem even more neglected than it already was. The lights outside the rooms flickered weakly, shaping strange shadows on the puddles that covered the ground. I grabbed my bag and walked toward the small office at the end of the row. The door creaked open as I pushed it, and a bell above me chimed. A damp smell mixed with old cigarette smoke filled the air. Behind the counter sat a man slumped in his chair. His face was thin, and his eyes were narrow and sunken, giving him a look that reminded me of a rodent. His oily hair clung to his skin, and his thin lips formed a smile that felt forced. "Need a room?" he asked, his voice rough, as if he had not spoken to anyone for a long time. "Yes," I answered, trying to ignore the shiver that crawled up my back. "Only for the night." He nodded and reached under the counter for a key. His hand shook a little as he passed it to me. "Cash only," he said, his eyes staying on my face longer than they should have. I hesitated, but I knew I had few choices. "All right," I said, removing the needed cash from my wallet. When I handed it over, I felt his fingers touch mine for a moment longer than necessary. The sensation made my skin prickle. "Room 7, he said, pointing toward a line of doors. "You will be fine there." I muttered a quick thanks and rushed out of the office. The rain had slowed, but the wind still whistled through the cracks in the motel walls. Room 7 was easy to find, and I unlocked the door. The instant I stepped inside, a sour, stale odor washed over me and made my stomach twist. The room was tiny, with wallpaper peeling away and a carpet stained in several places. The bedspread was worn out, and when I flipped on the light, roaches darted across the floor. Sickened, I stepped back outside, deciding right away that I could not stay. The idea of lying down in that dirty bed made my entire body itch. My car, though small, was clean and felt safer. I returned to it, locked the doors, and lowered the seat as far as it could go. It was not comfortable, but it was far better than the room. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because I woke to the sound of low voices. Still groggy and confused, I rubbed my eyes and looked around, trying to remember where I was. Then I noticed them. The man from the front desk was standing outside room 7, holding a flashlight. He was speaking quietly to another man I had never seen before, someone taller and broader, with a hood covering most of his face. The desk clerk unlocked the door, and the two of them slipped inside. My pulse rushed as I watched, frozen in place. What were they doing in that room? A horrible feeling washed over me as it became clear they were searching for me. Their movements were deliberate, checking the bed, the closet, even crouching down to look under the frame. They were not just exploring, they were hunting for someone. They were looking for me. I struggled to breathe, feeling as if the air inside the car had vanished. Part of me wanted to start the engine and race away, but I did not want to draw their attention. I forced myself to stay still, barely blinking, praying they would not notice my car sitting a short distance away. The minutes dragged by painfully slowly. I watched them tear through my belongings in the room, tossing my bag aside and scattering my clothes across the stained carpet. Then the tall man said something to the desk clerk, and they both paused. They exchanged a look, then walked out of the room and shut the door behind them. The tall man scanned the parking lot, his gaze passing over my car. I slid lower in my seat, hoping he would not see me. After a moment, they both turned and headed toward the office, their figures stretching into long shadows under the flickering lights. I waited until they were completely out of sight before I dared to move. My hands trembled as I reached for my keys. I turned the key slowly, but the engine came to life louder than I wanted. For an instant, I thought they might hear it, but when I checked the office, nothing stirred. I backed out quickly, keeping my headlights off until I reached the main road. My heart thudded in my chest, and every instinct urged me to get as far away as I could. The rain had stopped, but the night still felt heavy and suffocating. I drove for miles before I finally turned on the radio. I needed some sound, anything, to push away the terror that clung to me. When daylight finally began to rise, I spotted a diner and pulled into the lot. I was not hungry, but I needed a moment to think. I ordered a cup of coffee and picked up an old newspaper left on the counter. As I flipped through the pages, a headline caught my attention. Local motel closed after investigation. The article explained that the Sunset Motel was shut down only days after my visit, following reports of illegal activities and the arrest of the owner for human trafficking and several other crimes. A cold shiver ran through me as I read the story. I had escaped something far more dangerous than a dirty room. I was driving back from a quiet country home where I had spent the previous night alone. The place was peaceful, surrounded by wide-open fields, and it left me feeling calm. The air was cool, and the drive through the countryside was soothing, with soft hills and the occasional farmhouse appearing along the road. I had not planned to stop anywhere, but it was getting late, and I did not want to continue through the dark. As the sky grew dim, I decided it would be smarter to find somewhere to sleep. That was when I noticed a small, worn motel just off the road. The motel looked old, as if it had not been cared for in many years. The paint on the walls was flaking away, and the neon sign flickered weakly, casting a strange glow across the empty lot. There were no cars in sight, and I was not sure if the place was even open, but I was too tired to keep going. I pulled into the lot and parked near the office. Inside, the air felt stale, and a damp smell struck me the moment I stepped in. The man behind the desk was elderly, with gray hair and a faraway look in his eyes. He barely spoke as he handed me a key. I did not ask anything. I only wanted to sleep. My room was at the far end of the row. As I walked toward it, I noticed how silent everything was. No other guests, no traffic, only an uneasy stillness. The door to my room let out a loud creak as I opened it, and the inside was not much better. The room was tiny, with faded wallpaper and an old bed with a sagging mattress. A single weak lamp lit the space, stretching long shadows across the walls. I thought about turning around, but weariness held me in place. I set my bags on the floor and sat at the edge of the bed. The air felt thick, as if the room had not been opened in years. I tried to brush off the growing sense of discomfort. I told myself I was overthinking everything, that all I needed was rest, yet something felt off. When I lay down, I could not shake the sense that someone was watching me. I looked around the room. The shadows shifted with the flicker of the lamp. I pulled the blanket up and closed my eyes, but the feeling lingered. It was as if the room itself was alive, quietly breathing around me. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was only my mind playing tricks. Then I heard it, a faint rustle, like fabric sliding across the floor. My eyes flew open, and I pushed myself upright, searching the room. At first I saw nothing, only the same dreary space. But then, in the corner near the foot of the bed, I noticed something move. It was dark and hard to distinguish, but something was there. I froze where I stood, my heart thudding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stared into the corner, praying it was only a trick of the shadows. But the shape grew clearer. It looked like a person, crouched low with its back facing me. I could not make out any details of a face, only a dark outline that seemed far too solid to be a product of my mind. It stayed still for a few seconds, then slowly began to turn its head in my direction. My stomach sank. There was no face at all, only a smooth, empty darkness where features should have been. A wave of cold swept through me, leaving me unable to move. At last I forced myself to act, scrambling off the bed and stumbling backward toward the door. The figure did not shift, but I had no intention of waiting to see if it would. I snatched up my bag and struggled with the doorknob, my hands trembling uncontrollably. I flung the door open and dashed outside, gulping in the fresh air as soon as I stepped out. The chill of the night brushed against my skin, but I barely noticed. I hurried to my car, refusing to look back at the room or the motel. I climbed into the seat, turned the key, and raced out of the lot. My hands shook on the wheel, and my heart would not slow down. I kept driving for a long while without stopping. The empty road stretched into the darkness ahead, and I kept glancing at the mirror, half expecting to see something behind me. But the road stayed empty, and the dim glow of the motel sign grew smaller until it vanished completely. I had no idea what I had encountered, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never return to that place. Whatever I had seen in that room was not something I ever wanted to face again. The rest of the trip went by in a haze. I did not stop until I reached a town far away, where I found a bright gas station and pulled in to breathe. I sat in my car, replaying the events in my head, trying to persuade myself it had been a nightmare. But deep down, I knew it was real. The sight of that empty face at the foot of my bed stayed with me long after I left the motel. I had escaped without being harmed, but the memory of that night would remain with me forever.